Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to the execs who are here from FinForum, and thank you to you, people, for taking time out of your busy schedule to help provide more clarity on the exciting but somewhat misunderstood investment banking and corporate finance industry, and what it really entails. So I think that the world of corporate finance and investment banking is somewhat ambiguous to many finance students, given that finance is such a broad topic. I think people sometimes interchange the different career paths and the different career options that they can take with the whole finance route. So leading on to that, myself alongside my fellow executives being Musa, Naledi, Neo, and Oratele have prepared a few questions that we believe will help to share some insight into corporate finance and investment banking, and will hopefully help students who are starting to look at prospective career options in finding a career that's best suited for them. So yeah, so without further delay, the floor is all yours, people. Maybe if you'd like to introduce yourself, give us a quick overview of who you are, maybe what you studied and what you're currently doing, and then we'll proceed to ask you the questions with Musa leading the way on that.
Thanks, Ricardo. Thanks for the warm introduction, and good afternoon to each and every single one of you guys. I'm really, really happy to be here. So yeah, in terms of what I studied, in my background is in economics and econometrics, which I studied at the University of Johannesburg, as well as my postgraduate in investments. In terms of my work experience, I started off my career while I was studying actually in asset management, which was what I did while I was studying my honors full time. And then after that, I moved on to corporate investment banking space. So in terms of just who I am as a person, I think I'm a bubbly person. I like to meet people. I like opportunities like these to interact with other people. I think I really relished the opportunities when they came when I was a student as well. And I obviously look forward to paying that forward. And yeah, I'm a social person. I like to go out. I like to, get to know different facets and different people. I'm very inquisitive by nature. So I like to get to kind of understand what goes in behind any mechanisms, whether that's work related or just psychology or working with people. And yeah, I'm just like a very genuinely enthusiastic person in the pursuit of knowledge. Yeah, I kind of hope I answered your questions in that regard.
Yeah, you definitely did. So yeah, like I said, we had a few questions prepared. So I think maybe, Musa can, lead the way and she can take us from there. And then, we'll give you an opportunity to explain. And then once that's done, the next exec will come through with their question and we'll just, move forward from that.
Good afternoon, everyone. So what I'd like to find out from my end, Sipo, is what are your main responsibilities as an investment banker?
Okay. Thanks for the question, Musa. That's a good question. So I think there's an important distinction to be made in this regard. So I work within corporate and investment banking, but not particularly investment banking, as that is a subdivision of corporate and investment banking, otherwise known as CIB. So in terms of my role, I work in risk as a sovereign and bank analyst. And to answer your question, basically, I look after a portfolio of countries, call it 13 or 14 odd. And essentially, I'm to research and report on the bank's existing potential exposures to these countries, as well as associated banks involved. So for example, if a product house, perhaps that's within investment banking, call it maybe export credit, export finance, wants to do some mining deal in country X, for example, a country of which falls within my portfolio, then basically my role is to initiate research on that paper. So by that, I mean, I'll write a detailed country analysis report detailing all the facets of the economy, the risks involved with the investment, and essentially provide a recommendation on whether or not I think that it would be prudent for the bank to invest in this country, and basically which sort of counterparts in terms of banking counterparts would be the right ones to work with, simply because we don't have a presence in each and every single country in the world. And in terms of the bank's part, we'll work with the local banks of that country, wherever the deal will be and where the risk will lie, and hence the bank part. And basically, I'll then report on those banks as well. That means that I have to go through their financials, get to understand exactly what makes the bank work, what are its pros, what are its cons, what are its strengths, what are its weaknesses, and basically get an understanding of whether or not this is the bank that would be the best sort of partner in going through with this deal. Because you'll find that within the space, as much as, maybe competitors as banks, we tend to work, hand in hand quite a lot. So I think that kind of distinguishes and explains what I do in short.
Yes, The floor is all yours.
All right, thank you so much. So I would like to ask you, Sipho, is do you wish that you had better prepared for the workplace outside of school? And if so, what would you have done differently?
Well, given enough time to think, I always kind of feel that you could always be better prepared. But realistically, I feel I did prepare adequately as a student, simply because I did balance quite a few things and ensured that I had a well-rounded experience at university as well, not forgetting about the social element as well. I do feel I was a bit more prepared than some of my peers, simply because I started looking for opportunities to gain insights from as early as second year. And this resulted in me getting, selected for things like a summer internship opportunity within CIB, but at another bank during my second year. And this is how I sort of got to truly understand and learn about the chosen career path. And, I did other things in my third year. I got to work in investor relations, focused on capital markets, which gave me, insights in terms of just looking at investments as a whole, and particularly for publicly listed companies and the various elements involved. And this kind of like created a sort of a wide net for me in terms of my preparedness. And although I do feel that I'm tempted to say I probably would have spent even more time researching if I could go back in time now, but I feel what I did was essentially adequate.
That's great to know. Thank you.
Sure thing. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So yeah, the next question will be by Naledi. So yeah, floor is yours.
On my end, I would like to ask you, what do you believe made you stand out to secure your current job or role, right? And how would you advise students to better position themselves for similar opportunities?
That's a very good question. It's a very extremely good question. So it's always hard to say for sure, given I was not in the room when the final decision was made. But for one, I do think that, my marks helped me get a foot in the room. So I would suggest that, try and get those as high as possible. It's not to say that they are the end all and be all, but I do think that, they kind of help secure your position in a meeting, at least, where I think then it starts talking about more about your character and sort of the kind of, energy that you give off to the people that are in the room with you. But in terms of standing out, I would say that my experience did help in that regard. I mean, by the time I went for the rounds of interviews, I had interned for 2 financial companies and was working full-time as a junior equity analyst at an asset management boutique while I was pursuing my honors. So I think being able to communicate that experience effectively and exhibiting that I am disciplined in finding a way to juggle a rather difficult postgraduate degree while working during the day. I also had been employed by the University of Johannesburg as an economics tutor during my third year, and I had a few achievements. I tried to communicate and sort of show that I've always been interested within that space, and I've taken the time to go and do the research necessary to kind of have a full round view of what to expect and to know for sure that this is what I want, and it's not just a matter of I hear that it sounds like an interesting thing or space to be in, and that's why I'm kind of like jumping into it. So I think being able to communicate those things effectively kind of gave the interviewers insight into, my preparedness, my actual interest within the space, and yeah, like the fact that, I was willing to put in the work. In terms of advice I'd give, I would say, make it as easy as possible for yourself to learn. So by that, I mean like just within your immediate peripheral, try and surround yourself with as much information as you can. So for example, I learn a lot just by having, on LinkedIn, following the right pages, for example, on Twitter, following certain pages, make it as easy as possible for you to kind of learn within the spaces that you're in. I mean, if you spend a lot of time on social media, for example, it's fine. Just find ways then to kind of maximize on what you can get from that too. And, you can never have too much knowledge. So try and get as much knowledge as you can within the spaces that you're interested in. It'll communicate effectively as well when you're then in those spaces and in those interviews trying to land a role. And also, I think this is probably the most important part of it. You kind of want to make sure that it is a space that you really want to be in. I know that some people are tempted to go into a certain career path based on the things they hear about it, what it looks like from the outside or the financial sort of benefits that come along with it, but make sure that it's something you're interested in as well, because it's going to be something that you'll be doing for a very long time. And not every day will you wake up and you'll feel, some days you'll feel tired, some days you'll feel like, oh, there's some things that are happening in my personal life. So make sure that's something that you're really interested in and you see yourself like sort of having a path in that space. I hope that kind of answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Sure thing.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, that's a really good question. So the next question is by Oratele. And yeah, so she can go over, she can take it from here.
So on my end, as we all know, mental health is an important factor that plays like a significant role in a student's lifestyle. So on my end, my question is, how is the pressure like in the workspace? And does this career path allow for sufficient mental health and work-life balance?
Okay. And yeah, guys, I see my internet is slowing down a bit, so I'd like to apologize in that regard. But yeah, and again, excuse me, very good question. So I think our chosen career paths, within it, there's a decent amount of pressure at times, given that we do work directly with money in various capacities. I can't really speak for other teams within the bank or even other people in different companies, but personally, I do feel that the pressure is fair. It's not too much. It's not too much that I can't handle, but it does get demanding at times. So it means that to get things done, I kind of need to it demands more of me to kind of get things done and for me to step up at times. But I do like the challenge. I mean, I'm able to maintain my relationships with family, close friends, as well as have a social life, which I think is important in terms of remaining on top of your game. And yeah, you also mentioned a good point on mental health. And, I think I'm fortunate that I feel within my space that is considered. And I do feel that in general, corporates do understand that we are human. We're not just numbers punching in. And they really try to ensure that there's adequate balance. That being said, it is sort of quite a case-by-case basis dependent. And I encourage you to check and monitor sort of your mental health on an ongoing basis, even when you're all within the space. And, you may start and feel like everything is going well and that your mental health is in check and your job is not too demanding or not taking away too much. And I mean, like, if that starts to change or you start to change for whatever reason, then I think it's important that you kind of like always make sure that you revisit that on a daily or weekly basis, sort of to make sure that, you don't have any corporate burnout or any of those kind of things. But yeah, I hope you guys got that. Okay, great.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, so now this question is probably going to be more, of a personal question related to you. So pretty much is, how did you, or when did you realize that this was your ideal career path and this is what you wanted to pursue? And then the second follow-up to that question is, in terms of other students wanting to maybe, break into this kind of industry, the corporate finance, investment banking, what career options can they take to pretty much give them a stepping stone into it? Because as you mentioned, you worked as an equity analyst at a boutique asset management firm. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. So in terms of knowing that this is the career path that I wanted to take, I think it rather came relatively easy to me because I was always just interested in this space, to be honest. I mean, as soon as I heard about, this investment thing, it sounded sophisticated, it sounded cool. And it was something that I really thought that, I really want to be into this. I want to get into it. And I found myself, watching videos on YouTube about what it's like working in different kind of settings, watching related movies and documentaries. And sort of, I got to learn quickly that it's quite a broad space. And that kind of gave me like great comfort in knowing that within investments and within corporate and investment banking, there's such a big space you can play in. There's many different kinds of specializations that you can kind of focus on. And, that optionality and the fact that it was something at the time that I was interested in and I saw a clear career in, I really figured that this is probably the best space to be in. I mean, I will say that, to aid in that understanding and the comfort in making that decision, I did spend quite a lot of time researching on the different career paths. And, even if I'm researching on engineering or whatever the case may be, I'd find myself reverting back to something related to investments. And I'd say like, what, I think this is probably the best space for me to be in. In terms of students, backgrounds in terms of getting into the space, I would say that it's quite a a good space to be in because it doesn't really, I won't say it's not degree centric, but there is a fair amount of wiggle room because, for example, within the space I work in, I work with a lot of engineers. I work with a lot of people who did statistics, maths, people who did, different kinds of sort of quantitative degrees, work within the space that I work in. And of course, the people who did, economics, investments, and the traditional BCom orientated degrees. So in terms of getting into the space, I think as long as you're doing a quantitative degree, I think you shouldn't have an issue coming into it. I mean, most banks prepare you. If you're going to be particularly within the corporate and investment banking space, most banks will prepare you and they'll make sure that you get adequate training because I joined with a cohort of people, I think it was 23 of us. I'd say a good 10 or so didn't have a BCom background, if not more actually. It might be even 15 of us out of the 22 did not have a background in BCom at all whatsoever. And, they took the time for the first 3 months to just get us through sort of an accelerated program where we get to understand the fundamentals of investment banking, corporate finance, and the many factors involved. And all these people are thriving within the bank. So as long as you have a teachable spirit and you make sure that you study something that's quantitative orientated and you can communicate your effectiveness and your ability to learn, I think you shouldn't have a problem joining the space. It's quite a dynamic space. It's quite an interesting space. And I for one, really enjoy it. I don't know if I answered all your question there, Ricky.
Yeah, no, you pretty much did. Just the last bit is, so now let's say, a student has their degree, they got their qualification, and now they want to get into, corporate finance, investment banking, but, sometimes that's a very competitive and very, tough market or tough industry to get into. Would you maybe recommend any other, type of career path that a student can maybe follow than to break into it? Or should they just obviously just try purely go for grad programs?
Yeah, so I think by default, I always sort of suggest that you start with looking into getting to an investment banking, right? Get into an investment banking, corporate investment banking graduate program. I think that's probably the easiest way to do it. Again, this is my opinion. I don't have monopoly over the truth, nor am I in HR, so I don't really, have insight beyond that. But I think getting into sort of corporate and investment banking, you get the training that you require firstly. And also it also gives you a good chance to learn to be, an amateur and, for people to be patient with you. And also for you, importantly, to realize and recognize that this is a space that you really want to play in and operate in. It's unfortunate that, it is quite a difficult space to be in. It is quite competitive. So I'll say that if you don't necessarily go get into a grad program, then try and find sort of auxiliary career paths that sort of fall within the scope of what you want to know as well. I mean, corporate and investment banking would just as a sort of division or cluster has a good 8 divisions within it. So I think, unfortunately, I can't point you to one specific place that has all this information, so you'll kind of have to dig around. But I suggest that you kind of understand what it entails. So I mean, for investment banking, for example, we'll have corporate finance where they do sort of mergers and acquisitions. That's more related. That's closer related to maybe your asset management in terms of what you kind of the efficacies and the skills that you need in terms of that regard. Analyzing and understanding companies. And then if you move on, there's actually within investment banking still there's export credit finance, there's private equity and venture capital. And those all talk to sort of the being able to value a company respect. Then there's other roles within sort of corporate investment banking where if you're in risk, for example, you could be a quant in risk. So that means that if you do the statistics and your maths, you can focus on that and understanding the risk involved with your counterparties and all the other sort of risk exposures and factors that the banks look at. If you're an engineer, there's many other places you can be in within the bank. And as long as you sort of have the quantitative grounding, there's quite a lot of different spaces you can be in. So if you can't get into a grad program, I would say then look at what's sort of closest to whatever you're interested in and try and find that in the market. There's plenty of investment roles, consultant roles, associate roles within the space. Just make sure that you keep your head out and you communicate that effectively to whatever employer there is. And yeah, just try and get the most out of what you can, and then maybe see if you can then transfer into corporate investment banking if you still feel that this is still something you really want to get into. But there's quite a lot. It's a broad space. It's quite a finance is quite a big beast, And there's a lot of different things that you can look at. So I wouldn't say necessarily like limit only what you want to do to corporate investment banking. But, you know, if it is the part that you really think you want to get into, then I think your graduate program is probably your best bet. So try and make sure that you stand out, put yourself in the interviewer's shoes, you know, look at, if I was the interviewer and I was interviewing, or I was going through, maybe you'll find that they'll get like 8,000 applications for a single year intake for corporate investment banking graduate trainee program. You know, try and see, okay, fine, there's in the 6,000 or 8,000 people, there's quite a good chance that there are some people who have marks just as good as mine, if not better. How do I position myself differently? How do I communicate myself differently in my cover letter, for example? What sort of features do I kind of drill into? So I'll give you an example. Instead of saying I'm a hard worker and I'm disciplined, try and give an example as to why you say that is. You know, give some more meat for them to kind of digest and kind of see as much of your personality as they can. And actually really like can kind of fizzle out your kind of personality from the interview stages even. So be yourself as well if you're fortunate enough to get to those positions. Yeah, I feel like I've been rambling now.
No, that definitely wasn't a ramble. That was definitely very insightful. I think, you know, that's definitely going to help a lot of students who obviously are, you know, starting to look for prospective, you know, career opportunities. But yes, that's actually all the questions we had planned right now. So if any of the other execs maybe have a few other questions they'd like to ask, you know, just to pick at your brain once we have some time, they definitely can feel free to do so. So yeah, if anyone has any questions, definitely feel free to ask people.
Hi, Sipo, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So what would you advise a young, I don't want to say young, what would you advise a student that is actually an average student but is studying investment or studying economics or any other BCom in general degree when they actually want to do the job that you're doing currently?
Okay. So by average, I take it you mean like you know, like
60s, 50s.
Okay.
There.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, that's fair. I would say, you know, still the same advice kind of like applies in terms of just try and stand out. So I think people are very open to, you know, to working with someone who's firstly demonstrated that of course they can do the job. So obviously you kind of have to maintain your make sure that you're passing, but also just communicate, you know, what else you offer beyond that. I mean, as much as, you know, marks are important, I think people do understand that, you know, I am working with an individual, you know, and there's a lot of factors that go into the different marks that people get. You know, there's a lot of, you know, backdoor factors or background factors that might not necessarily be visible. So by that, I mean like family issues or certain issues that people go through or whatever the case may be, you know. So just if you can exhibit that, you know, beyond your circumstance or beyond just, you know, the marks, what you can offer, you can communicate that, you know, you're a great speaker or you're a very inquisitive person, you have a teachable spirit and you'll always be willing to learn and you outwork each and every single person around you. I really think that, you know, being able to communicate those things and exhibiting those things is a good way to still land a job within the space. I would say though, like, you know, try by all means to whatever student, try by all means to get your marks as high as possible. Because unfortunately, before you get into the room even, you know, while they're still maybe taking their first step in their assessments, they'll maybe look at the 6,000 or 8,000 individuals. They'll maybe only look to secure 500, which will kind of go through the motions as sort of, you know, the interview stages go on. So I won't sit and say, yo, just, nah, it's fine, you get your 50 and you'll be fine. But I will say that I think it is very possible for you to still land a job within that space. Obviously, just try and communicate effectively then what else you offer. Try and show your personality and try and be, you know, teachable, try and show that insight, take the extra steps. I think something that people sleep on, and I think this is probably getting better now, but LinkedIn is guys, I know of people who have gotten jobs off LinkedIn. I know of people who necessarily want the best students in terms of marks, that's your average 50, 60 students, and they still landed very, very good roles and they're excelling in those roles because they showed that spirit, they connected with the people on LinkedIn, they did the research on the different companies, they looked up the people on LinkedIn, and obviously not in an overbearing way, but they found ways to kind of start communicating with those people, and they took the extra steps to join organizations and social organizations like, for example, this one, and, you know, got to really understand and got a lot more information than the average person. And they kind of communicated that as well. And from that, the person saw that, no, man, this person obviously is passing what they're studying. So they are able to learn, but beyond that, above and beyond that, they have a genuine interest. And you'll find that, you know, in career trajectory, that will probably be the most important factor compared to, you know, what mark you got in this subject in this year 10 years ago. You know, that interest and that passion to really, you know, outwork everyone around you, to really learn and master a skill, I think will get you through as well, as long as you can communicate it, of course. So to the average student, I would say, like, don't worry. Don't worry. I think your path is your path. And I don't think we sort of have mistakes or certain destinies and pastime purposes that we need to fulfill. And just focus on that, focus on, you know, what you're interested in, and try and obviously to stand out in as many ways as you can beyond this, just academics. Yeah. All right, thank you. I don't know if you're still talking, you're on mute, but sure.
I think Naledi has a question that she'd like to ask you. So yeah, definitely floor's all yours, Naledi.
All right.
I wanted to ask, what is your biggest blunder? I like learning from other people's experiences. I like learning from people's experiences, so that I don't know. I guess I use their mistakes as a stepping stone, that I don't have to go through the same thing. But I'm actually very interested. What is your biggest blunder? Yeah. What has been your biggest blunder, and what did you learn from it? What did you take?
I think like it might not like sound like the biggest thing, but there has been an instance where, you know, I might have just had a slip in concentration, and let's say I'm doing a report on country X, and I'll do the whole report on country X, and, you know, go through the motions and everything is fine. But let's say in the final recommendation, I'll say, as a result, I recommend investment into country Y. And then I sort of submitted that. And I think some people, you know, when you read through the things, I don't know if, you know, what are the parts they pay more attention to, but of course that recommendation part is probably the most important piece in that entire document. And they get there and they read and they see it's a different country name. So I think that was like, you know, like, okay, like what credibility does everything else I've read kind of have now, because this person has, you know, gone through all this process and kind of made this mistake. You know, so I think that was a big blunder in that regard, because it kind of made it seem like I didn't care about my job or whatever. But yeah, the implications of it were, it seemed like I was sloppy or I didn't care, but it was an honest mistake in that the countries both started with like a similar letter, and both countries were in my portfolio. And I'd actually looked at something for someone not too long before writing that final recommendation. So that blunder was picked up, thankfully. And yeah, I was extremely, you know, embarrassed, obviously, because so many different people within the bank get to see those reports. And in terms of what I've learned from it, I've learned to always just make sure that, you know, you check things. I'm tempted to say double check, but if I check effectively, there's no need to double check, you know. But yeah, like, I think it's important to make sure that whatever it is that you put out there, whatever you put your name onto, you know, that's sort of your brand, and you have to make sure that, you know, you're not sloppy with it, and you know, you'd stand for it at any point. So yeah, that was like that. I think I had a lapse in concentration, and I went through the whole document again. The recommendation part is usually very standard wording for the most part. So I didn't really, like, you know, look deeply or closely at it. But yeah, it's taught me that don't do that. Don't play with your name. You know, regardless of where you end up within your career, within the bank or wherever it is that you work in. You know, don't take those things lightly. Don't everyone understands. No one kind of like ridiculed me and said, oh, whatever. But you know, you do make mistakes, but try and learn from them and try and make sure that it's not sloppy mistakes. So yeah, that was sort of my takeaway from that.
Thank you for sharing that with us.
Sure thing. It's embarrassing, but hey, it happens.
So yeah, so actually I also have a question, and this is more to pertain to the first question that was asked. And you obviously spoke about, you know, sticking out and doing things that make you, you know, different from the rest. So the question now obviously is, you know, what's your take on trying to obtain, you know, alternative qualifications, you know, either going like your CIMA, CFA, or even doing like your FE regulation, you know, type board exams. do you think that would give you a good footing, if you were able to pass and get those qualifications? Or, what's your take on that?
Most definitely. We do work, I think, within just, not even just, CIP, but in general investments, we do work in a space where those qualifications do kind of speak volumes for you. So, I mean, this is sort of what I've seen from the market and just from what I've come to understand in my modest time within sort of, the industry. I think CFA is probably the number one place I'd go to. So making sure and, going through the motions of getting your CFA, that's probably, for me, the best sort of qualification that everyone kind of like wants to get into and wants to start with, simply because it just obviously prepares you regardless of your background in your studies, but also it clearly communicates the quality of who you are as an individual, as a candidate. Because, there's different studies or there's many different degrees that not maybe every HR professional might be like mostly aware of or understand effectively. So I think that CFA qualification kind of goes and proves and demonstrates to the market that you're someone who, I think everyone understands how difficult it is to get it. And once you get it, I think people understand, kind of person that you are, and kind of fizzles out, your commitment to what you want to do. But in terms of just, again, it depends on what it is you want to do. So CFA would probably be my go-to because it kind of like reaches or covers the biggest, section of investment. But I'd say things like CIMA are really good. CIMA, if you want to be a management accountant, it's an amazing qualification to have. I mean, if you're an accountant and you're going the CA route, that's wonderful to have as well. You can always add on to that as well. But, there's some that I'm starting to see more and more of as well. I mean, for example, if you want to go maybe the private equity and venture capital space, I know that some people are starting to pay a bit more attention to the KAYA qualification, which, forgive me if I butcher this, but I think it's Chartered Alternative Investment Analysis or something to that effect, because they've understood that maybe CFA doesn't necessarily cover as much of just the private equity and venture capital space that they would like to have. So then, KAYA, for example, looks at just that space, alternative investments, which I think is going to grow within the next few years. And you do board exams as well. It's an official accreditation similar to that of the CFA, and there's many others. I mean, I can't go into all of them. I mean, my insights in that regard are quite limited. But I think the probably go-to space for someone wanting to get into CIP, corporate finance, investment, in any part of investment banking, asset management, I think CFA probably would be the default one I'd go to.
Sorry, there we go. So that actually, I think, unless no one has any other questions, I think that definitely, wraps it up. So, we definitely do appreciate you. We definitely appreciate, the insights that you've given to all of us. Definitely think that if a student who watches this will definitely be able to have a better understanding of how to move forward. And, you've given us pretty much, just from what I found from this important, right, was you stated something that stood out was you said that in your second year, you're really looking for like opportunities to pursue. So you jumped on that bandwagon early, you went and you're active. And then that also, ties into what you said of being able to stick out. So I definitely think that was incredibly, helpful and insightful. And if any of the other execs have any other questions, definitely feel free to ask. But other than that, Jim, we won't keep any more of your time. I'm sure you're quite busy. So thank you so much for today.
No, I appreciate the opportunity, Ricardo, and I would say that obviously just whatever I say, please take it with a grain of salt. I mean, I've only been sort of in the industry for 3 years now, and I'm still sort of finding my path and my footing, but I kind of like try to speak from my experience and try and give as much as I can from what I've been exposed to. But obviously, please talk to other people. Please look at maybe talking to more senior people, or just read up as much as you can, and then, reach out to people within the space, use LinkedIn effectively, and, hopefully you'll get all the information that you require to make your decisions. It is an important one to make.
Okay, perfect. So if no one has any other questions, we can definitely, just call it a day. And then, thank you for your time and obviously the insights.
Sure thing.
So I think no one has any other questions. So definitely then, end the presentation. So thank you again. And I hope you have a pleasant day forward, and best of luck with the rest of your work.
Thank you, guys, and all the best with the career paths. And this is not just for the people on this call, but for everyone listening and watching. All the best, guys. I wish you the best sincerely. Yeah.